it's Julie, and it's September 2020, and I'm about a week away from taking off on my every 4 year ritual, which, true to form, kind of happened bass backwards a little bit for me. Um, I'd like to share a little bit of the story with you and see if you think it might be interesting to follow along. In 2008, I found that there were several factors that kind of collided that year. Um, my, I was an empty nester. I had been a single mom, and I found myself, like a lot of people, really confused by what I was seeing and hearing on the radio and in on TV and on the internet. And I, having spent my entire life in the San Francisco Bay Area, um, I I didn't recognize some of the voices that I heard on TV. And so, being that it was a pretty historic election, I combined a couple of my favorite passions. And I decided to ask my boss if I could take a month off. Um, I had always wanted to ride my scooter cross country. Um, I had, I was obsessed with the election and all the data and um, all the um, polarization that was kind of happening in the country. And so I wanted to know more because in where I live, there's a lot of homogeneity to this area. And so, and finally, I had always been fascinated and an admirer of people who could collect stories, who were good storytellers, but even better interviewers. Um, in the model of Studs Terkel, for example, um, I use that specifically because if you haven't listened to any of his stuff, he was a radio broadcaster in the 60s, 70s, 80s. His stuff is archived online, and particularly his oral history of the Depression is kind of remarkable stuff. But what I loved about his work was that he interviewed everyday people, a lot of famous people. There's a great interview with him and James Baldwin, but he could he could tell the story of working people and their experiences and really bring it to life. So I knew I wasn't Studs Terkel, but I got an audio recorder, and with the help of my friends Derek and Craig and some good advice from a producer at KPFA, I took off and I rode my scooter, and whenever I stopped, I would turn it on and talk to people in diners and parks and anywhere I could find them. And I was just asking simple questions, how they were, what they hoped for, what they needed. And I would write about it every night, and I would post the audio. Um, it turned out it turned out to be a great adventure, and the the interviewing part was way more fun than the scooter part, I'm gonna say. But anyways, I made it cross country, and it turns out that it lifted me up, and it took away some of the cognitive dissonance that I had in my head, because people who see the world differently than me, um, we came together, um, it wasn't the differences in our views as much as it was the shared values, and I could only get to that by talking to them, and so I really loved the experience, and I repeated it in 2012 on a Greyhound bus for 30 days, and then the pièce de résistance being 2016, when I loaded a mattress and a cooler in the back of a cargo minivan and slept in Walmart parking lots. Um, what I didn't realize, and was different that year, was that I don't think that I really reconciled as much of the polarization, at least in my heart, especially because of how it ended up. And so since then, for the last 3.5 years, I have been wrestling with some pretty key questions for me in terms of how people decide what's true. How I think of that dissonance as being a puzzling problem when there are opposing thoughts in your head and you're trying to reconcile it. And a big one for me since 2016, and it was the subject of the last posting from that year, is about the fact that 82% of evangelicals voted for him. And even harder for me to reconcile was that there was leadership, faith leaders, who encouraged them to do that. And I am a person of faith, and I really, really struggled. And so I set out talking to people that I know, people that I respect. I took some comparative religion classes, and I'm setting out this time realizing that I I don't have to make it hard this time because the pandemic is what's going to be hard about it. But and I don't know how many interviews I'm going to be able to get. In years prior, I don't think I ever had a day where I had less than 5. And I think I averaged 8. But this year is going to be different. And so I don't know exactly what I'm going to find, but I am going to go back to a couple of places that we've been before together. And I'm going to be focusing more on, I've always gone to church on every Sunday, and I hope I've introduced you guys to some really amazing congregations. And so I am going to go out and learn what I can learn about this particular chasm between how people are reconciling their faith and their politics, and this historic election. I hope you'll consider coming along with me. Thanks.